That works. Just take a finger whenever you get that like this. If you would, I really appreciate it.
I'm just going to sit. I need that chair on the fly. Oh, you do? Yeah. Would you rather have Let's play the green and white. He's going to bring you one up here. You know these Bob Young. Oh, yeah.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning. How you doing? Good, good. Happy to have you here. My name is Matt Jordan. I'm with the Kansas Leadership Center. We're excited to host this conversation today. It's exciting for us to have so many friends and past program participants here in the building. So for those of you that have been to a KLC program before, would you mind raising your hand? Well, welcome back. And for those that haven't been here yet, welcome to the Kansas Leadership Center. Let me take a minute or two just to welcome you, to let you know how excited we are you're here. We have a little view book here, a little notebook in front of you that can give you a little bit of background of Leadership Center. But also what's more important about that, the latter part of the notebook are notes pages. So you can use this for a notebook if you'd like. I'm going to give you a little bit more about the Leadership Center. At the Kansas Leadership Center, our mission is to foster civic leadership for healthier communities. And we work with folks across the state from all sectors, business, government, and nonprofit, all coming together for the common good. Hence the theme on the front of that notebook, for the common good. And when we heard about this idea, this conversation between folks from the private sector, the public sector, from local, state, governments, coming together to talk about one of the most important issues in this state, rural housing, we were pleased to be able to make the building available and to have you all here. So we're so happy that you're here. We look forward to a great conversation today. As a host, I need to maybe mention a couple of important logistical details. So you all have found the refreshments, right? Coffee, tea, water out there, which means also you need to know where the restrooms are. So all the way to the back toward the front to the left, back to the front doors to the left are the restrooms. With a group this size, if line starts to, if you start to get a line on the first floor, there are other restrooms on the second floor. So please make yourself at home. We're glad you're here. Again, this is exciting for us because when we think about the important issues of the state, obviously housing is one of them, and to have this group of folks here coming together to talk about new ideas is important. We think of leadership as an activity, the idea of bringing people together to do difficult work, and that's what you all are here to do today, to exercise leadership, to work together across sectors. So we're happy to have that. It's my pleasure to introduce Jason Van Sickle. Jason and I have known each other for more than 20 years now. It's been a pleasure to have had a chance over the last year or two actually to talk to Jason, think about his ideas, and to see this meeting here today. And he's going to give you a little bit more of that history. So Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Wow, okay, there's a few people here today, so it's funny because, you know, for me, all the best partnerships come through networking, through people you know and trust, introducing you to new people that you get to learn to know and trust as well. And Matt's been a good friend of mine for many years. We know and trust each other. We also know a lot of stories about each other that we've pledged to have a stalemate and not tell anybody else. So, but this was, you know, it's interesting because Matt's known about my company's real push to be problem solvers, not just developers, but problem solvers. And so one of the things we worked on for the last year is trying to find a solution to market rate rural multifamily housing. And Matt said, I'd really like to introduce you to somebody, Patty Clark, because the USDA does a lot of work in these rural communities and is doing a lot of great things, and I think she'd be interested in hearing what you're working on. And so he organized a conference call, and after that call, and again, you know, when you have people you know and trust introduce you to people, it's usually a pretty good introduction. And Patty and I talked about having a meeting with a few key organizations that you'll hear today as they present what they've been working on, and it was just going to be a handful of us meeting in a room. I think Matt had a capacity of 20 people for the first place we were going to meet. And then we just started reaching out to people and telling them about what we wanted to do in terms of get together and having a conversation on rural housing. And we reached out to people, and they reached out to people, and I'll point out Network Kansas, who did their fair share of reaching out to their communities. And here we are today with around 150 representatives from communities from all across Kansas. So welcome to you today. I'm glad you're here. I think that conversations between communities, conversations between public-private organizations, is what's going to help solve the problem of the community housing needs, whether it's owner-occupied or rental in your communities. It's not going to be an easy solution. It's going to take every organization with all its great ideas working together on a multi-front attack of this problem. And so I look forward to that discussion today. So without taking up any more time, I'd like to introduce someone that most all of you know, the Director for the State of Kansas of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Patty Clark.
Good morning. I would like to echo that we are grateful for this audience this morning, and we hope to ignite some conversations among all of you. And as Jason said, this isn't necessarily endorsing a certain concept or a certain best practice as much as it is exploring a variety of things that are starting to emerge to help rural communities address the chronic challenge of housing in our rural areas. And it is chronic. It doesn't matter where I go, it doesn't matter who I talk to, that when we talk about the challenges of rural communities, usually the first one, if not always the first one, to emerge in those conversations is housing. I want to tell you a little bit about USDA Rural Development Housing Programs. I want to talk a little bit about what I think about when I think about rural housing challenges, but mostly I want to devote a little bit of time about some things we need to consider, some things we need to think about as we try to address those challenges and others that are emerging in rural Kansas. When I think about housing and housing issues, housing opportunities, housing challenges in Kansas, I think of two things. I think of the old adage, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and I think about Moneyball. And let me explain that. You always hear, well, we've got an employer that wants to grow, or we've got an employer that wants to come in, a new business that wants to come in, or we think we have this need for housing, but we're not sure what income bracket we should be dealing with. And so which comes first, the economic development, the business recruitment, and then the housing? Or does the housing come first and then the economic development and interest by employers come? It's always a chicken and an egg. And at some point you just have to experiment and step forward. But that's where the Moneyball comes in. How many of you are familiar with the movie Moneyball? Or the story Moneyball book? Okay. What did they do? They took a very data-driven process to build a baseball team. It was all about statistics, not about money. It was how can we build a competitive team with, by comparison to other teams, a not very robust budget in terms of player salaries. And they used statistics, they used data to say this is how we build a team and become competitive, and they have been. That's the same practice we've got to put into play in our rural communities. And when Jason and Matt and I had our first conference call, Jason, did his presentation, and I said, Jason, I said, the movie, and I'm kind of a movie movie buff, so forgive all the references. Remember the line in the movie that you had me at hello? I said, you had me when you said your plans are data-driven, because we haven't done that enough in our rural communities. We haven't looked at the data. We haven't dived deeply into statistics. What's the demographics? What were the demographics 20 years ago? What were they 10 years ago? What are they going to be 10 years from now? What are they going to be 20 years from now? What's our housing stock look like today? And in what condition is it? And how might we change that? And what's our median household income in our community? And how many people are in that range? How many people are below that range? How many people are above that range? What's our employment picture? What's our downtown community look like? What are the options that we have for renovation? What's our residential core look like, as opposed to newer homes being built on the outer fringes of our communities? We haven't taken the time to dive deep. Historically, and USDA Rural Development has been a part of this in a good way, but also to a degree hampering the process. We've chased money. We've chased programs and availability of programs of assistance. And instead, we need to plan and see how does that program fit with what our strategy is and will be in the future? It's good to take advantage of all those programs, and they exist, and they're tools in the toolbox that need to be used. But simply building something because there's a program of assistance there doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense when we did it before. It doesn't make sense. It makes less sense now. You're going to hear from a lot of different people today, and I hope for a very, very, very interactive and engaged conversation. You're going to hear from the folks from the Kansas Department of Commerce talking about the Housing Interagency Council and the Housing Assessment Tool. And this is a group of resource partners that came together, state and federal, private and public, to say, okay, what can we do differently as resource providers to help communities think about what their real need is and build a strategy to that need, and then provide the resources to backstop that plan. And we meet regularly now, and it's a good process, and the Housing Assessment Tool is just one tool in the toolbox communities can use to look at their community and say, these are the gaps. We know these are the gaps because we did our homework. You're also going to hear from public square communities and a pilot that they've been conducting in a couple of rural communities and the lessons that they've learned from that process. And you're going to hear from Jason about some thoughts he's had and some things he thinks might be options and experiments in rural communities. A lot of ideas, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to local leadership. It's going to be an exercise in leadership, and it's going to be calculated risk-taking. And in some cases, you have to be bold. And in some cases, you're not going to make everybody happy. And I would be remiss if I didn't say there's some words that are floating around these days that are not four-letter words. Sustainability, sustainable, is not a four-letter word. Regional and regionalism is not a four-letter word. Planned, livable communities are not four-letter words. It's what we should strive for to increase and enhance the quality of life for the residents that choose to live in our rural communities. They should not have lesser housing. They should not have lesser employment opportunities. They should not have lesser education and poor educational facilities. They should not have aged and old and constantly breaking down infrastructure. They deserve just as good a place to live as anybody else does. But that's going to take some bold and insightful and informed and less risk-averse leadership. And as I travel throughout Kansas, I see examples of less than astute decision-making. And that's about the most tactful way that I can express that. Where investments have been made and you just scratch your head and you say, why? Chautauqua County, and I drive by the new jail when I go into town. And I look at what it did to the county courthouse square. And it's right a block and a half a block away from the elementary and secondary education footprint in the community. And there's homes right across the street from it. And I think, was that the wisest investment that they could have made with those public funds and in that place? Or if they had taken a step back, might they have made a different decision? When I try to take a walk in Topeka, when I try to walk to work from where I live to my office, there are many places there are no sidewalks. They built a brand new Discovery Center adjacent to Gage Park, and there's no sidewalk leading to it from 10th Street. And I think to myself, what happened? And I don't mean to be critical of the public bodies that made these decisions. What I'm trying to explain to you is we've got to think differently. We've got to take into consideration things that might cost a little more money, to do it the right way first, because we're not going to have a second chance anymore. Our days of second chances are numbered. And it's time to make those very long-lasting, sustainable, livable decisions that make our community a place that the younger generation wants to come back to or to come to and live. Recently, the Rural Resource Partner Group, which is about 36, 38 different agencies and entities and resource providers that work with rural communities, met with a group of 30-somethings. Liz was one of the attendees. They're called the Power-Ups. And at the presentation, at the end of the presentation, I looked at the 5 people that were in the room and I said, what makes a community attractive to you? Why would you choose to live in a particular rural community? What matters to you? And they all said it's how a community takes care of itself. What does its downtown look like? What does its parks look like? What does its streets and sidewalks look like? What's its housing stock look like? What's its personality? What's its school look like? Are they taking care of themselves? Is it evident by those outward appearances of the community? And if it's not evident, it is less desirable. And we've got to take a step back, and that's what we've got to look at when it comes to housing. Do we have the right mix for the right income level for today and for the future? Are we taking care of our residential core? Or are we allowing homes to go into disrepair and decline and not doing anything about it? Do we have good codes and ordinances that help us in that regard? And that's tough. If you're a city council person and you're in a community and you pass a bunch of codes and ordinances that make people do things that they don't necessarily want to do, and you step outside your door, you're going to hear from your neighbor immediately. Those are local decisions, and that is local leadership, and it has to be courageous, and it has to be deliberate. And we've got to fix some of these things that we've let go over the last 4 or 5 decades. I'm really grateful for this opportunity, beyond words, to be in this place, the town hall meeting room at the Kansas Leadership Center, to have this discussion with this group of people. You're the ones that are going to fix it. USDA Rural Development delivered over $1 billion, or $500 million in the last federal fiscal year. Over $500 million to rural communities for homeownership loan guarantees, homeownership direct loans, rental assistance, home repair loans and grants, and we have built some really fabulous, in the last 3 or 4 years, multifamily housing dwellings, including the first super green residence in Mulvane. And we just finished up and did a ribbon cutting on our first farm labor housing project in Dodge City. And hopefully up in Randy Robbie's territory, we're going to have a new one in Rexford in the not too distant future. So we're still investing in those multifamily housing properties. But with all those resources invested, along with our partners like Kansas Housing Resource Corporation, and JR, raise your hand, he's with us today.